Football is so back. It's time to dive into Washington versus Colorado State.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lars, we couldn't be more excited because football is back, and that means just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, no matter where you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell down below as well, so you never miss when we post a new show, because we've got post-game updates coming at you, all sorts of different stuff, so you want to make sure you're subscribed. And if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review as well. And with that being said, it's time to dive into this Colorado State game. As all the everydayers out there know, we got our bold predictions and your score prediction coming to us at the very end of the show. We always want to dive into the defensive keys, but we start on the offensive side of the ball, where some breaking news to start us off right here. John Mills will be starting. That makes 2 true freshman starters in the class of 2025 against Colorado State.
Not a surprising move, kind of a deserved move in a way, or moving away for John Mills. Just, it's the safest move in terms of why not give him his first start in the season opener, knowing you have Paki Finau if, it just becomes atrocious out of nowhere, which we don't expect. But my point is just, it's good safety net. I think it's a good opportunity for John Mills to prove that he actually can hang at this level and play potentially all 13 games as a freshman. Whether he starts all 13, probably not, but I think this could be a good barometer test for how John Mills hangs against another competition.
So I agree. I don't think the first part of that is the best way to frame it. I don't think you're wrong with anything that you said, but I think the way that should be framed is both of these guys are going to see the field, which kind of, leads into our first key, which is let's see what this offensive line looks like. We've highlighted just what this defense might look like, especially when you just think about this really veteran Colorado State unit with Paul Tangelo and Jaquez Evans as these 2 senior edge rushers who are, impact players. I don't think they're necessarily, all conference type edge rushers, but they are solid, experienced players who could certainly give some good tests to Carver Willis and Jerez Party. So I'm really curious to see what that's going to look like. And especially, and this is why I think that it's probably better to, frame it as it might even still be a drive-by-drive rotation between Paki and John Mills. Is what is the cohesion of this group going to look like? I think from what you and I have seen throughout the spring, throughout the fall, that there's not going to be a whole lot of, chemistry troubles or anything like that, because both of these guys have taken so many reps with the first team offense that no matter who is out there, it is a true first team unit. So I'm really excited to see what that's going to look like, because if you can protect Damon Williams and just give him time to throw, I think he can get in rid of them with Denzel Boston rather quickly. And I think you're going to open up a whole bunch of lanes for Jonah Coleman.
Yeah, I mean, to take advantage of the talent mismatch that you have, even when you're playing a true freshman or a redshirt freshman at left guard, you should still win the game, and you should still also do a pretty good job to protecting them on and opening running lanes for Jonah Coleman and Adam Mohammad. It's a good barometer test, but also one that I think no matter what, they're going to pass. And it's, again, more just going to be how do they look? What you mentioned, the cohesion, kind of just, is there one of those freshman mistakes? Is there, the false start that kind of sets you back? Those are the things you're looking to avoid, because this is a game you should win rather handily, and just it's a matter of getting them that experience and just letting them continue to sort it out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a big part of this. Let's talk about this in relation to the running game, where it's really hard to judge a team based off last year's stats. I was kind of going through them, and then I was like, no, this really isn't fair, because there are just going to be so many differences between last season and this season for both squads, especially when we look at what Washington brings to the table. We know what we're going to see from Jonah Coleman. We're going to see somebody who knows how to break tackles. Doesn't matter, what situation he's thrown into. We know that this is the kind of player who has been able to make plays regardless of what the line looks like in front of him, regardless of what's going on around him. He's a guy who can consistently be relied on. And I think that's just kind of my biggest question with this game regarding him is we know what that production is going to look like. I mean, whatever it wants to be. If you think he's going to get 11 carries, if you think he's going to get 25. Like, I don't think that that's going to end up being the case. But whatever it is, this is a guy who Washington is going to lean on early and often. And I think, especially when we look at what this defense is going to throw at you, having somebody like that who you can rely on to set up play action, to set up some of these zone reads with Demond Williams is going to be such a big part of everything that this coaching staff is going to want to do.
And with that, I'd also throw in Jordan Washington. Like, what is he able to do in this game as well? You mentioned the run game. I think why not give him some touches as well? Because again, like you mentioned, if Jonah gets 12 carries for 8,500 yards, whatever, and a touchdown, you're not really judging him based on that. You're judging how the line in front of him looks. You're judging what Adam and Jordan are able to contribute because, like you mentioned, you have so many weapons on this offense. You're not going to show everything week one, but you should do enough. And certainly I think the key here is, establish the run early, establish the offensive line early, not just wait and see, second quarter, third quarter type thing. You should be able to put Colorado State away pretty early on just based on the talent gap.
So I love everything you're saying there. I just want to make sure that we can talk about these receivers a little bit as well. You also kind of, just a spoiler and make sure everyone stays tuned for a little bit later. You also set me up pretty good for an Adam Mohammad bold prediction I have coming down the pipeline. So stick around for that. But another bold prediction, just, to stay in that realm for a second. I think the first play of this game, you talk about establishing the run. I think Washington's going to do that, but I would bet not a whole ton. I just think that we're going to see some kind of play go to Raiden Vines-Bright. I was going to say, I'll bet you anything it's going to be a wide receiver screen, which I think is probably the most likely option, just to give him the ball early, get him just kind of in rhythm and let him make plays. Something where you can get John Mills out in front too, let him pull and just see what that all kind of looks like, get the freshmen involved. But I want to see what that's going to look like, because this is one of the big questions that you and I have been talking about a lot over the course of this week. We love the talent that Washington has at receiver behind Denzel Boston, Rashid Williams, Raiden Vines-Bright, obviously being the starters, and then Omari Evans, Audric Harris, Kevin Green, Desmond Roebuck being the other guys that are kind of rounding out that rotation. But why not get Raiden involved early? And, similar thing with John Mills, just kind of let him settle his nerves, just make sure, hey, look, this is something that we know is easy, can get you in rhythm rather quick. And I have a feeling that we're going to see a little bit of that from Washington, where it's one of those things where we know what Denzel is going to bring to the table, and we know that he's probably going to see some kind of special coverage, whether it be a bracket, just a true double team the entire time, whatever it might be. We're going to see that early. So, and Jedd Fisch knows that. So if there's something in the script where it's, let's throw some kind of screen to Raiden Vines-Bright, let's get him involved early, I'm not going to be shocked.
I agree it's going to be the Raiden. I would just say, wouldn't shock me if they went the whole Kalen DeBoer, Jalen Polk deep shot in the Alamo Bowl, I believe, one of those, take that shot deep, see what happens, because Raiden's got the speed to get deep, and whatever you end up doing with Denzel on that play is what it is, because to me, I think this is a perfect opportunity for Raiden to potentially establish himself. And, when you look at the battle with Rashid and Omari, Denzel being himself, you still are looking for guys next year, and why not, especially ironically, as I wrote on Inside the Huskies, or into the Huskies Wire, I should say, that the first other offer for Raiden Vines-Bright was Colorado State. So you look at it and say, why not give him that start and let him see what he can do? I think if Raiden, I don't want to say leads the team in receptions, but leads or is top two in one of the three categories, I won't be surprised come end of Saturday night.
Sure, that I can certainly see that happening. That would be a lot of fun. I just, on the same light before we move on here, a lot of this is going to be focused on seeing what these other guys can do. But at the same point, my question, and, to make it a key here, is get Denzel Boston in rhythm at some point, where I don't think that this is going to be a game that we look back on and say, wow, Denzel really took over. If he finishes with, let's just say it's 3 catches for 50 yards by the end of the day, I'm not going to be shocked, because you want to just kind of spread the ball around a little bit and just let everyone get involved in, one of these early season matchups. But at the same point, I want to see what that timing looks like with Demond Williams. I want to see just kind of how he looks after, practicing for just 2 weeks out of the entire offseason because of the hernia that he was dealing with and recovering from that surgery. So I'm curious to see what kind of impact Denzel Boston has on this game. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a big one, but I think just his presence will certainly help open other things up in the passing game for Demond Williams. With that being said, speaking of passing games, I think Tacario Davis could be in for a big day. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives back the advantage to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. The app makes it super simple to go check out all kinds of deals for this upcoming matchup against Colorado State. If you're looking for it, one of the best ways to get a nice deal is through the zone deals. The zone deals are awesome. Pick the section and Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Lars, as we move over to the defensive side, I think that this is going to be, when I say it's going to be a big day for Tacario Davis, I don't necessarily think that he's going to come down with, 4 pass breakups or an interception or anything like that. But I do think that Brayden Fowler-Nicolosi might try to test him. And I think that'll be a lot of fun because we're probably going to see, I think that from one of the things that we saw throughout fall camp is Ryan Walters is not going to be afraid to play some shadow coverages. And what I'm really excited for is, I've said it a lot, is that versus Jeremiah Smith in Ohio State in a couple of weeks. But I think with Tacario Davis, this is one of those things where we know he wasn't happy with how his season went last year, even though he was an all Big 12 second teamer. He knows that he has so much more to prove. And if he gets tested a time or two early, something that Jedd Fisch talked about a lot this week, and Ryan Walters did as well, that Brayden Fowler-Nicolosi is not afraid to make every kind of throw. Why not go at Washington's best corner? And I think that's something where if we see that a couple times on the first few drives, it could be a lot of fun to watch.
I agree. I think I would just kind of make it a totalitarian secondary kind of point and key here. Focus on the fundamentals. Just play sound football. And I know that sounds not necessarily bold or, groundbreaking in any sense of the imagination here, but what we've seen from Washington in a couple of, early season games is a little bit of rust, which is understandable. But you brought Ryan Walters in, an established defensive coordinator, to kind of, be ahead of the curve, if you will, on defense. And Colorado State does provide you a good test in that regard, but a test that you should absolutely win. And it goes, I think the reason why I say this, it goes the same for Ephesians Pricelock, where we saw him struggle a little bit last season. Obviously, we mentioned, kind of had some procedural things done. So can he, show that he's into full form coming into the 2025 season? I really think it's a perfect game to establish your entire secondary, whether it's Ephesians, Alex McLaughlin, Mikel Esteen. If Mikel finishes tied for the team leading tackles, I won't be surprised. Just really kind of setting that tone early on, starting from the back to the front.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that. I look at the secondary, and the same can be said for Leroy Bryant, just to make sure we mentioned all three of these corners. But that was something where I'm excited to see what this is going to look like in the same light, because this is, what I was mentioning on a show a couple of days ago, where it's Brayden Fowler-Nicolosi is a great early season test for Washington secondary as a whole because of his experience. Like, this is a guy who's played 28 games of college football already. And, even though Tacario and Ephesians have a lot of experience, Leroy Bryant and Rashawn Clark, who we're also going to see a fair amount in the nickel, according to Jedd Fisch, don't. So whatever that might look like, and, it's why I say, if you test these other guys early, maybe it's not working out on the outside. And something I've been, pretty consistent about throughout fall camp is we're going to see whoever's in the nickel get probably the most tests throughout the non-conference schedule at the very least. In the passing game, I'm excited to see what these guys could look like, because even though Leroy is in his third year on campus, he's still relatively untested, especially in the nickel. And with Rashawn Clark, we know what that looks like. He played one game last season, I believe it was. So there's not a lot of experience between the two of those guys. And especially for, again, Leroy playing a new position, looking at what the secondary can do, I think that by the end of the game is where the most targets are going to wind up going. And for those pair of guys, it kind of plays into a bold prediction I have later on. Again, stay tuned for those. But I think that's just going to be the X factor to this defense as a whole. And we're going to really see that shine through in week one, because if, Washington does get up early, like is expected in a game like this, and Brayden Fowler-Nicolosi has to drop back 35, 40, 45 times to throw the ball, like, that's probably where you're going to think he's going to throw the ball. I know that these tight ends are going to get involved a lot. They got a pair of dudes that are over 6'5". So I think that Mikel Esteen, Alex McLaughlin, whoever's playing in the box and will probably wind up in man coverage on one of those guys, is going to get tested a fair amount as well. But I think where you look at where the least amount of experience is, that's always where opposing offensive coordinators are going to want to test. And it's going to show for Leroy, especially as the starter, not just in the passing game, but in the running game as well, where he, is going to have to come down and set edges and make plays in space.
And when you talk about that experience, one thing that also kind of stands out for me when you look at Colorado State is the left side of the offensive line. Not a ton of experience there. There's some promise there, but most a lot of third-year sophomores and things like that. This is a prime opportunity for Zach Durfee, Ontario Thompson, Simone Peppa, depending on how many 5-down fronts versus 4-down fronts you get in this game. We both think there's probably going to be a fair amount of 5-down fronts just for a couple of different reasons. But with that all being said, let your kind of veteran presence shine through. I think that would be the key here. Zach Durfee should be able to set that tone on the edge. If this is a kind of coming out party for Ontario Thompson, I don't think either of us would be surprised. How many snaps does Simone get versus Logan, things like that. All those guys should factor in on that when you're looking at that left side of the line. And if you can kind of collapse the pocket early on and just kind of make it a real, one touchdown game for Colorado State, maybe, teaser there for the score prediction here, that's kind of what you should expect going into this game week 1.
So I like where you're going with that. Let's talk about what this run defense is going to look like, because that's where we want to see the most improvement from this defense. And when you talk about, the 4-down versus 5-down front, we'll see what that looks like. And a lot of that does depend on how much Ryan Walters might want to wind up putting on tape. But I look at what this defense brings to the table. And the thing I want to see them do is just establish their physicality early and often in this game, because we just didn't see that very often last year. Even, early on in the season where, we saw it against Eastern Michigan. We saw it against Weber State. But outside of then, there weren't a whole lot of points where it's, this team is going to be able to do whatever they want, on the ground today, especially as, we saw the season where on Iowa being the number one example of that. I just think that if this group of defensive linemen, you highlighted all the necessary guys, plus there's so many others in the rotation that you and I are really excited about. If we can just continue to see them take a step forward and this rotation just turns into what it's supposed to, there are so many things that this defensive line can do as the season goes on.
Yeah, here's a kind of teaser to eventually get to the next segment, but what would you put the over-under at true interior defensive lineman playing in this opener? 5.5? You taking the over or the under?
7.5.
7.5? What are you taking the over?
If it's 7.5, I might take the under, but it kind of depends on how the game plays out.
And I think the reason why I wanted to ask that question is similar to what we're talking about with John Mills on the offensive line. You don't have any freshmen that are going to break through, but those redshirt freshmen, some of those younger guys, Elenius Davis being a number of guys that are kind of in that next man up mentality, see how they perform as well, because what you're probably going to get from Ontario Thompson. He shouldn't play a ton of snaps because you shouldn't need him to. It's a prime opportunity to get that early lead and then let your younger guys prove, hey, we can also show that we have that legitimate depth in the conference, because you don't really want to tip your hand, like you mentioned, if you're Ryan Walters. So why not let some of those young guys get an opportunity as well?
Yeah, I like where you're going with that. That's why I set the over-under so high, where does an Omar Khan get into this game? Does a Caleb Smith or one of those other guys who I think Caleb Smith might wind up playing more on the edge. But I think that's kind of where the line is, because Armand Parker being that 7.5, because he's the one guy who's not listed on the depth chart, who it sounds like might, still have an opportunity to break through in the rotation. I think that this is just something where the reason I think you and I are both so excited about this defense, especially the front seven as a whole, is because we just didn't see this kind of depth, this kind of talent at any point last season. And, Colorado State might not necessarily be the best example of, and I mean no disrespect when I say that, just in terms of what that might look like, but it's still just something where we can see this defensive line take a big step forward in this game and just say, oh yeah, okay, they weren't even doing this against Weber State and Eastern Michigan last year. Maybe not Eastern Michigan because they had 7 sacks in that game, but we just didn't see this kind of production from this defensive line, even against some of these non-conference opponents last year, especially when you think about that Wazoo game as well. I think that's kind of where, when I say establish the physicality of this unit, you have an opportunity to do that. And then, even when we just kind of look at the non-conference slate for the next couple of weeks, I feel like Husky fans might feel a whole lot more confident in this group, just seeing it on the field once.
And that really does kind of surmise what we usually say coming out of fall camp, is like, just trust us. It's going to be really good once you guys actually see it. Is it going to be, great? Probably not, but I do think it's, trending in that eventual direction more so next year. But again, it's just a matter of you have enough horses on that defensive line to make it go. And it's just a matter of, Zach Durfee had 2.5 sacks against Eastern Michigan. Maybe he has 3 against Colorado State. Like, that'd be a nice coming out party. And I think it's just, I'm not saying we're going to expect that, but it's just one of those, that's what you would like to see, especially if you're Jedd Fisch and Ryan Walters.
I think that just put me in the mood for some bold predictions. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Upside. Hey, Locked On Huskies fans, are you still paying full price for gas? Stop leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. Use our limited time promo code FOOTBALL and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You could make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas you already needed. At first, I thought it was too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Don't let this offer drive on by. Download the free Upside app now using our limited time promo code FOOTBALL for a limited time 25% per gallon boost. That's promo code FOOTBALL. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. So, as all the everydayers know, I always forget who's supposed to go first. I don't think it matters today because, it's the start of a new season. So I'm just going to give you the floor here.
So I'm going to steal a little bit of one from you earlier that you hinted at, but I'm going to double down on it. Adam Mohammad and Raiden Vines-Bright both get their first career rushing and receiving touchdowns respectively. I think this is a game where when we talk about last season establishing the foundation, this is still kind of an extension off of that, if you will, because it really is kind of surprising that Adam didn't get one last year. The amount of times we bet on it to happen, and he had like the yardage and everything, and now I think this game, especially on Saturday night, he'll get that legitimate opportunity either in the goal line or he'll just break one for maybe 25 plus per se. And I think Raiden certainly is just primed to get his first career touchdown as well.
So I like where you're going with that. Yeah, one of mine is Adam does score his first career touchdown, and I feel like this is the kind of game where we're really going to see what not necessarily the split is going to be like for the entire season, but what the future of Washington's running game looks like. Because the spread on this game is 21.5, according to our good friends over at FanDuel. Like Washington is expected to handle business, and if that does end up being the case, why would you, keep your preseason All-American and Jonah Coleman in there for even like a full 3 quarters, like, depending on how the game goes. But with that being said, I feel like we're going to just see the most touches that Adam has had in any game in his career in this upcoming game, because we're going to see, you talked about the foundation. We're going to see an extended look for Raiden, for Desmond Roebuck, for some of these guys that are going to be around for the next 2, 3, 4 seasons, because that's what all of this has been building towards. And that's what Jedd Fisch has been talking about for a very long time. Like Dylan Robinson on the defensive side is a guy who probably see a decent amount of work. Like all of these freshmen that are listed on the depth chart are going to play an extended amount. I know Adam's not a freshman. He's a sophomore, but it's the same thing where he is expected to take over as the bell cow in 2026. And why not get him 12, 15, 17, somewhere in that ballpark of touches in this game? Because not only can you afford it in a game like this, but also it's a really nice preview of what could be coming down the pipeline.
And I think this is kind of an extension off of that. Just how many young guys can you get into this game where, we mentioned John Mills, the list goes down. Champ Lilliard probably get some stats in this game as well. Just how much can you let those new guys, kind of shine bright? And I think it all starts with Damon Wood. When you talk about Damon and the abilities that he has and everything that this offense can do, why not kind of just let him get going early, get that rust off, get him some high percentage throws, if you will, like you mentioned, the screen to Raiden, things like that. This is a game where Damon should have over 80% completion. I'm going to go 21 of 25 for call it 287, 2 touchdowns, and 1 potential rushing touchdown.
Okay, that sets me up really nicely for mine. I always just feel weird just predicting someone to go over 80%. You're not wrong. We saw it in both of his starts last season. It just doesn't feel natural to say, oh yeah, that guy's going to complete 80% of his passes, unless it's like, whoever's running the Oregon offense where it's 3 yards per attempt. But I like where you're going with that. For me, I took the other side of this because I think that this is the kind of game where we're going to see a couple of designed runs for Demond Williams just throughout his time on the field, however long that might be, whether it's on the zone reads, whether it's a quarterback draw, anything like that. I think Demond is going to have 60 plus rushing yards in this game. And quite frankly, I think it's because his athleticism can allow him to escape any kind of spy, because he legitimately is just that fast. And I don't think that Colorado State, they have some nice talent. I really like that safety that they brought in from Holy Cross, but I don't think that they have the athleticism to stick with Demond when he starts to break contain. And I don't necessarily believe that, he's going to break contain because the offensive line is going to break down on play after play. But I think there are going to be certain times where maybe the coverage is really solid. Maybe they try to drop 8 guys at different points in time, and he is going to have to get out of the pocket and make plays with his legs. And I think we're going to see just one run of 15, 20 yards. And by the end of the game, we're going to see him with over 60 plus rushing yards in this game.
I like it. I mean, it speaks to what Jedd Fisch said, where it's Demond taking ownership of the offense. Like, when you talk about, him having to break contain or do rushes and things like that, yeah, it's not because the offensive line's getting, mauled by Colorado State. It's more just sometimes Demond can kind of use it. And I think that is one area where it's not a bold prediction or anything, but I am just kind of curious, where do we see that growth on the field in Demond? Where Jedd, kind of mentioned the football acumen, we touched on it a couple of days ago on the show. Let's see it. And I think that's where the run game comes from with that, where, Demond likes to run, but he's really trying to force himself to be a pocket passer in that respect, to be able to be a true quarterback. But this is the perfect game where why not just, if he breaks one for, call it 40 yards and a touchdown, I mean, I could see that happening.
Yeah, this is certainly the kind of game where that would happen. All right, let's jump over to the defensive side and again, I'll just give you the floor.
So this was an interesting one. It's a locked on staple, if you will, for both of us, where I have Tariq Buddah Al-Uqdah finishing with a team high 10 total tackles in the game. I think when it was a toss-up between him and Alex. I might have given the edge to Zach Durfee a little bit because you mentioned the run game, pretty substantially there. But I think because of that run effort, this Ryan Walters scheme really has unlocked Buddah. And I think with his ability to crash the lanes and still drop back in coverage, this is a good game for him to say, you know what, I can establish myself as the middle linebacker on this team. Yes, you'll still have Devin Bryant, actually Alexander, the list goes on and on at that position. But this might be a situation where, just let's get rid of the Jacob Monda discussion. Just prove that you can be that guy, that leader of the defense who potentially wears the green dot, and say, look, this is what, it wasn't me struggling at Wazoo to make tackles. Maybe it was the scheme that was an issue.
Sure, and coaching can certainly also be something that plays into that. So I like that. You said 10 plus total tackles?
I would say I just said 10 even, but if he gets 10 or more, I don't see him getting like 13, 14.
That's fair.
A little bit, that's too bold, but 10 would be a solid number.
He's the kind of guy that and this is why, just to reference yesterday's show and our bold predictions for the year, he's the kind of guy that can just rack up a lot of total tackles that might not all be solo, but, if him and Alex McLaughlin or him and McElveen or whoever else might be combining on a lot of tackles this season, because he's just the kind of guy that's always around the ball. And we've gotten a couple of questions about him from some of our insiders, from people on, social media, people that have, seen us in person at practice, and said, you guys haven't necessarily mentioned his name a lot throughout fall camp. Why is that? It's because that's exactly why. He's a solid player who just is always around the ball. We saw him make some flash plays and some interceptions in the spring, and this fall, he's really just done a great job of doing whatever is needed to help out in the run game, to help out in, dropping into coverage in the pass game, whatever it might be. And I've been really, really impressed with everything he brings to the table. And I love where you're going with that, because I'm really excited to just watch him this fall, which, speaking of interceptions, I wanted to put, people to these, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. I have Washington creating 2+ turnovers in this game. I think they're going to be both interceptions, because it just goes back to something that Ryan Walters said on Tuesday when I asked him about the test that Brayden Fowler-Nicolosi is going to give this defense. And he said that, he's a guy who is not afraid to make every throw on the route tree at any level of the field. And I think that this is where something that John Richardson has been preaching throughout the spring, throughout the summer, throughout the fall comes into play. It's he wants this team to make more great plays, meaning he wants them to create more interceptions. And I think that, there's no better way to start that off in your season opener than by generating a couple of turnovers, whether it's Alex McLaughlin, Tacario Davis, Dylan Robinson, Elias Johnson, if we see him get into the game, whoever it is that is going to get tested, finding a way to make a play on the ball is going to be so critical as the season rolls along if you want to take a big step forward. So why not start on Saturday?
Again, all the recipe is there for Washington to really have not a coming out party, because again, it's worth keeping in context. Like you mentioned, Colorado State's a nice test, but by no means is it a Big Ten team. So you should be able to handle Colorado State pretty well, which, if you want me to kind of tie that in with my score prediction, because I think, this is the first one of the season. It's still ridiculous that you don't make one of these with me, but I digress. So I have Washington winning 42-13. I think this is one where you look back at that Eastern Michigan game last season with Steve Belichick, it was 35-3. You can almost pitch a shutout. I think Colorado State has enough. There's some young pieces on the defense that'll get enough trouble early on to where you'll get a couple of scores out of Colorado State. But by that second half, if Washington pitches a shutout, don't be surprised.
Before we get out of here, let's get one thing straight. I don't give a score prediction for the everydayers because I am on record as being the world's biggest jinx, which goes all the way back to the Montana game. So that's kind of where a lot of this comes from too. So it's for the everydayers. It's for the people. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. It was a great score prediction. Thank you to all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season because a reminder, football is back. So wherever you're listening to us right now, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to smash that subscribe button. Click that little bell as well. So never when we post a new show. Plus, if you got any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you after the game.